It began with the unmistakable screech of tires cutting through the early morning quiet, followed by the sharp slam of a car door that echoed down the narrow, ivy-lined alley of Maplewood Heights. It was the kind of sound that made the neighbors flinch, not out of fear, but of pure, preconditioned irritation, because everyone knew what that sound meant. Karen was on the move. She wasn't a mystery in the neighborhood. In fact, Karen had earned her reputation as both a watchguard and a nuisance. Her powder blue SUV, always polished to a blinding sheen, sat proudly like a throne on wheels. That morning, she'd parked it at a diagonal across the alleyway, effectively blocking the only functional shortcut that residents use to get to the main street. To Karen, though, it wasn't blocking. It was strategic positioning. As the sun climbed lazily above the horizon, the rest of the neighborhood began to stir. People emerged, coffee cups in hand, ready to tackle another day at work or school. But instead of a smooth start, they were greeted by a comical yet infuriating sight. Karen, marching out of her garage with the pomp of a one-woman parade, wearing a neon-orange safety vest she clearly purchased online. She held a clipboard in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other, as if expecting to lead some kind of emergency drill. Without wasting a second, she zeroed in on the first target of the day. A young man in his 20s, probably new to the neighborhood, who had parked his dented hatchback a little too close to the fire hydrant for Karen's liking. He had just stepped out of his car, backpack slung over one shoulder and earbuds in, when Karen struck. "Excuse me, you can't park there. That's a safety hazard. What if there's a fire?" she shouted, gesturing wildly at the hydrant like it was a ticking bomb. The guy blinked, clearly caught off guard. He yanked an earbud out. There's still like 6 feet of clearance." "6 feet is not enough," Karen barked. "City code says 15. I've looked it up. And besides, you're setting a bad example for others. You college kids think rules don't apply to you." He tried to reason with her, even offering to move his car, but Karen wasn't having it. She wasn't here for solutions. She was here for the performance. Meanwhile, the sound of an idling garbage truck could be heard at the mouth of the alley, its bulky frame trying to squeeze past Karen's SUV but finding no path forward. The driver leaned out and let out a series of loud, frustrated honks, each one echoing through the alley like a call for help. Karen didn't flinch. She turned toward the noise, waved dismissively at the driver and shouted, "Use the front street. This alley isn't meant for trucks anyway." Of course, everyone knew that wasn't true. The alley was designed for utility vehicles, delivery vans, and emergency access. But facts rarely held water against Karen's convictions. She operated on her own set of laws, ones that shifted as needed to ensure she was always right. Windows started to open as neighbors peeked out, half amused, half exasperated. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Phones were lifted to capture the chaos, and you could practically hear the group chat messages being typed. Karen, undeterred, turned back toward the young man. "And your bumper is almost touching the sidewalk. Do you realize how difficult that makes it for wheelchairs, for strollers? You're endangering the entire community." The guy just stood there, unsure whether to laugh or run, and all the while, her SUV remained diagonally, parked like a blockade, completely unbothered by its own massive contribution to the congestion. No one could move around her car without reversing half a block or squeezing through with the risk of scraping their mirrors. But Karen had the righteous fury of someone who believed she was defending civilization itself, and nothing could convince her otherwise. Then came Mrs. Gomez, a middle-aged schoolteacher with kind eyes and a perpetually tired look from working double shifts. She pulled into the alley carefully, inching her minivan forward, trying not to make waves. As she attempted to slide into the small spot in front of her garage, Karen pivoted with military precision. "Oh no, no, no! You're over the line!" she snapped, pointing at the barely visible strip of faded paint that marked the parking space. Mrs. Gomez sighed and lowered her window. "Morning, Karen." "It's barely morning when we're dealing with this," Karen said, tapping her clipboard. "You're at least 2 inches over. That's enough to cause a chain reaction of misparking." "Karen," Mrs. Gomez said patiently, "I just finished a 12-hour shift. Can I please park my car?" "You can park it when it's properly aligned," Karen declared. "The rules are the rules. And if you don't follow them, what example are we setting for the children?" "You don't have children, Karen. That's not the point." Karen scribbled something on her clipboard and huffed dramatically, as if her personal notes had the power of law. Mrs. Gomez slowly backed up, adjusted the angle, and pulled in again, this time with laser precision, while Karen watched like a hawk. By now, the alley had turned into a parking lot of frustrated drivers and stalled vehicles. A cyclist tried to snake between bumpers. The garbage truck let out another forlorn honk. And Karen, the self-appointed guardian of order, remained, blissfully unaware of the irony that her own car was the source of most of the disorder. To her, she was holding the line. To everyone else, she was the line, the immovable one that no one could get around. And in that moment, as the first beam of sunlight glanced off the windshield of her powder-blue SUV, Karen stood tall in her vest, clipboard in hand, completely and entirely convinced she was saving the world, one bad park job at a time. By midday, the sun hovered high above Maplewood Heights, casting sharp shadows down the alley where Karen's SUV still stood, unwavering in its authority. The neighborhood had settled into a slow boil of suppressed frustration, the kind where people exchanged knowing glances rather than words, where text threads buzzed with the unspoken agreement that someone should say something, but no one wanted to be that someone. Not after what happened to Mr. Lipinski last fall when he dared suggest Karen move her car a foot to the left and ended up the subject of a 6-page complaint mailed to the city council. Inside their homes, neighbors stood behind curtains or leaned, subtly into their screens, live streaming the slow unraveling of yet another Karen incident, as they'd come to call them. The alley was not just a shortcut anymore. It was a stage, and Karen was, unfortunately, the headliner. She was now, pacing like a patrolling mall cop, clipboard clutched tightly in one hand, her other hand resting firmly on her hip. Her vest caught the light, practically glowing in the sun, giving her an almost surreal presence, like a traffic cone with opinions. She squinted down the alley, scanning for her next target with the confidence of someone who believed their judgment had divine endorsement. Then came Mrs. Gomez again, poor soul, who had finally settled in after her early morning run-in with Karen. She'd made the mistake of coming back outside just to get her reusable grocery bags from the trunk. But in Karen's mind, this was an opportunity for a second review. "You know," Karen said, materializing beside the minivan like a judgmental specter, "you're still a few centimeters off." Mrs. Gomez froze, her hand halfway to the hatchback. "Button. Karen, it's parked. It's not moving again today. Let's just let it go." "Let it go?" Karen repeated, scandalized. "That kind of attitude is why we have problems. If everyone just let things go, this alley would be a disaster zone." Mrs. Gomez tilted her head. "Karen, it is a disaster zone. Mostly because of..." She caught herself, exhaled, and tried a gentler route. "Look, I don't mean to be rude, but you don't actually have authority here." Karen clicked her tongue, a sound as sharp as a tack. "I'm trying to create structure where there is none. If we had a functioning HOA, things would be different. But we don't have an HOA, Karen." "Not yet," Karen said ominously, tapping her clipboard like it contained the prophecy of one. Further down the alley, Mr. Patel, a quiet man who ran the local pharmacy, attempted to parallel park his sedan without becoming the next casualty. He maneuvered slowly, carefully, inching his car between the lines with the precision of a surgeon. From her perch near the minivan, Karen spotted him and marched over, already mid-sentence. "No, no, no. That angle's going to ruin the entire..." "Flow of traffic," she called out, arms waving as if guiding an airplane. "You need to swing wider, Reverse again. You're off axis. Mr. Patel sighed but did as instructed, not because he agreed, but because it was easier than resisting. Karen circled his vehicle like a shark, occasionally making dramatic marks on her clipboard. For all anyone knew, it was just filled with scribbles and doodles of traffic signs. But she treated it as gospel. Across the street, Sarah and Mike, a young couple who had moved in 6 months ago, stood on their front porch eating toast, watching. The scene like a live-action sitcom. She's like a self-appointed parking czar, Mike muttered. Sarah snorted. She's like if Google Maps had a grudge. Down at the end of the alley, the garbage truck still sat, now turned off, the driver leaning against the side, scrolling through his phone, waiting for the tide of Karen to retreat so he could finish his route. He had already called dispatch, twice, and both times was told the same thing. If you can't get through, just wait. No point in escalating with her. And escalate she would. It was common knowledge that Karen had an entire folder in her home labeled Alley Violations, filled with photos, printouts, and handwritten logs of every perceived infraction that had occurred since she moved in 5 years ago. No one knew if she sent these to the city, or just catalogued them for her own sense of order, but it added a layer of unsettling intensity to every encounter. Still marching, still inspecting, Karen came across the recycling bins placed out by the Thompsons, a retired couple known for their pristine lawn and weekly jazz brunches. She paused, frowned, then grabbed her walkie-talkie and pressed the button. Base, we have a violation on bin placement. Repeat, bins are too far from the curb, possible obstruction. There was, of course, no one on the other end. As Karen spoke into the static void, several neighbors exchanged smirks. Eli, a teenager with a talent for tech and a quiet demeanor, watched from behind his garage door, where he was tinkering with a tiny drone. His fingers twitched with anticipation, an idea slowly forming in his mind. But for now, he waited. Karen marched on, triumphant, energized by imaginary authority, and fueled by the belief that she was the sole protector of order in a world slipping into chaos. It didn't matter that her SUV was the real obstacle, that the alley's problems had worsened because of her presence. In her eyes, she was a hero standing guard, while the rest of the world fumbled with morality and tape measures. As the sun hit its peak and the shadows shrank beneath the cars, the alley simmered with tension. More drivers arrived, more eyes peered out of windows, and the sense of collective annoyance thickened like summer humidity. Karen remained, clipboard in hand, ready to lecture, ready to document, ready to correct. And the alley, like some unwilling theater, braced for whatever act came next. The tension in the alley had ripened into something electric by late afternoon. The heat clung to everything, cars, buildings, skin, and the only shade came from the neighboring homes whose occupants had long since taken shelter indoors, peering through blinds or half-open windows to monitor the slow-rolling spectacle that had become their daily Karen episode. She was still there, still patrolling, clipboard in hand, armed with indignation and a never-ending reservoir of rules only she seemed to understand. The garbage truck had given up entirely. Its engine was off now, and the driver sat cross-legged, on the hood, eating a sandwich and scrolling through his phone. Every so often he glanced toward Karen's SUV, still planted diagonally across the alley, and shook his head. He wasn't angry anymore, just resigned. Other cars had either turned around or parked blocks away, hoping that walking the rest of the way would be less stressful than navigating a conversation with Karen. The neighborhood, however, was not resigned. It was fed up. Eli, the quiet 16-year-old, who lived with his mom in the corner townhouse, had spent most of the day observing from the comfort of his shaded garage. A bright kid with a knack for electronics, Eli rarely got involved in neighborhood politics. He preferred soldering circuit, boards and tinkering with old drones he scavenged off online marketplaces. But something about today, something about the absurdity of it all, lit a spark in him. Karen had just finished berating a middle-aged father for parking a hair's width, too close to a stop sign, when Eli made his move. He powered up a small quadcopter drone he'd been working on all week. It wasn't much to look at. Lightweight, duct-taped at the wings with a tiny speaker attached underneath. But it was functional. And in this moment, it was more than just a gadget. It was justice on 4 propellers. Eli guided the drone out of the garage with a quiet whir. It hovered, rose, and zipped forward with startling precision, climbing quickly into view before dipping low, right in front of Karen, who was now fussing over whether someone's side mirror extended into shared airspace. At first, Karen didn't notice. Then she did. She looked up, squinting, and took a step back as the drone held its position, hovering in front of her at eye level like a metallic hummingbird with a mission. The small speaker crackled to life, and a robotic voice rang out, magnified, across the alley. "Ma'am, this is the parking police. Please move your vehicle immediately or face imaginary consequences." There was a beat, a moment where the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Then someone giggled. It started. Small, a suppressed snort from behind a picket fence, followed by a full-blown chuckle from a window above. Laughter, genuine and cathartic, spread through the alley like wildfire. The garbage truck driver clapped once, then again, rhythmically, encouraging the others. A few residents even came out onto their porches to witness the miracle of the drone. Karen, for her part, was not amused. She flailed at the drone as if trying to swat a particularly smug mosquito. "You are violating federal airspace laws," she shouted. "This is harassment. This is cyberbullying." The drone, undeterred, responded with a polite mechanical tone. "Please remain calm. This is a public service announcement." Karen spun in place, looking for the source, her face flushed an impressive shade of red. Her eyes locked on Eli's garage, still half open, and she pointed dramatically. "You! I know you're in there! I'm calling the authorities!" Eli calmly brought the drone a few feet higher and made it do a slow, mocking loop before retreating slightly out of Karen's reach. She stormed back to her SUV, fumbling with her keys in a rage. The vehicle's alarm chirped as she yanked the doctor open and threw herself inside. A moment later, the engine roared to life. She reversed in a jerky, angry motion, scraping her passenger side mirror against a nearby trash can with a metallic screech. The can toppled over. She didn't stop. The SUV rocketed backward down the alley, narrowly missing the front bumper of Mr. Patel's sedan. Karen spun the wheel hard, swung the vehicle around in a haphazard 3-point turn, and finally retreated into her driveway, the tires screeching in protest, as if echoing the neighborhood's collective relief. There was silence for a moment. Then applause. It started with the garbage truck driver who stood and clapped like he was at a Broadway show. Then came Sarah and Mike from their porch. Mrs. Gomez added a whistle, and even Mr. Lipinski gave a single approving nod from behind his hedges. Eli's drone did one final triumphant arc over the alley, then floated back toward his garage as gracefully as it had arrived. The door lowered slowly behind him, like the curtain falling on the final act of a well-earned performance. Karen didn't come back out, not for the rest of the day. Not even when a delivery truck parked directly across from her house, partially blocking her driveway. Not even when a group of neighborhood kids started chalking hopscotch squares right in the middle of the alley she once claimed jurisdiction over. The power had shifted. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. The drone hadn't just mocked her. It had symbolized something deeper, a breaking point, a turning of the tide. For the first time in years, the neighborhood had pushed back, not with confrontation or argument, but with creativity and shared laughter. And that made all the difference. Later that night, when the air had cooled and the sky faded into soft indigo, the alley was empty and calm. The garbage had finally been collected. The cars were all parked sensibly. Even Karen's SUV remained, tucked neatly in her own driveway, centered perfectly between the lines. No clipboard sightings, no vest. No walkie-talkie, just a single house light on in the corner, and a neighborhood basking in the quiet joy of a long-overdue win. The night after the drone incident passed in a calm that felt almost sacred. There was no shouting echoing down the alley, no clicking of Karen's clipboard, and no flash of her neon safety vest under the porch light. The neighbors, still a little stunned by the victory, allowed themselves to believe, for the first time in a long time, that maybe, just maybe, the Karen era was over. By morning, the air was thick with early summer humidity and birdsong. The kind of peaceful neighborhood soundtrack that felt earned, like the calm after a thunderstorm. People began to emerge again, emboldened, coffee mugs in hand, slippers on feet. They stepped out into the alley without the usual double check for surveillance from behind blinds. Mrs. Gomez took her time loading groceries into her car without fear of commentary. Mr. Patel stood chatting with the garbage truck driver, who returned to his route cheerfully, no longer resigned to stalling in the alley while Karen recorded his every stop. Even Mr. Lipinski, who usually preferred to keep to himself, walked his dog with a little extra swagger in his step. But perhaps the most surprising transformation was happening inside the two-story beige house at the end of the alley, Karen's house. It remained quiet. There was no sign of Karen all morning. The SUV was still there, yes, no longer blocking the alley, but neatly tucked into her driveway. A perfect, regulation-compliant parking job. But Karen herself was nowhere to be seen. No pacing, no pointing, no clipboard. No voice breaking through the calm with accusations of community negligence. By mid-afternoon, a small group of neighbors gathered at the edge of the alley where the view of her front door was clearest. Not in a conspiratorial way, but out of shared curiosity. Sarah and Mike brought folding chairs. Mrs. Gomez leaned against her car. Even Eli, typically disinterested in neighborhood drama, wandered over, drone remote in hand just in case. "You think she's planning something?" Mike asked, watching the house like it was part of a crime scene. "She's probably writing a manifesto," Sarah replied. "She could be meditating." "Maybe she's finally found peace," Mrs. Gomez offered, with a smirk that said she didn't believe it for a second. Eli didn't say anything, just kept glancing at his drone like a cowboy ready to draw. Then, like a clock striking the hour, the front door creaked open. Everyone froze. Out stepped Karen, not in her vest, not with her clipboard, but in a simple, oversized cardigan and jeans. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail and, perhaps most shockingly, her hands were empty. No papers, no props. Just Karen, alone, stepping into the sunlight as if she hadn't just spent the last 5 years terrorizing the alley with unsolicited regulations and lectures. She looked unsure. She walked to her mailbox, opened it, and retrieved a few envelopes. As she turned back toward the house, her eyes caught the group of neighbors watching her from the alley. For a brief second, everything paused. The air, the birds, even time itself seemed to take a breath. Then Karen gave a hesitant wave, not the commanding wave of someone about to direct traffic or call out a violation. A small, almost apologetic motion, a peace offering in the shape of a hand. The group blinked. Mrs. Gomez was the first to respond, lifting her fingers in return. Then Mike, then Sarah. Even Eli gave a small nod, fingers still resting on the edge of his controller. Karen stood still a moment longer, then, without a word, walked back inside. The door shut gently behind her. The neighbors stared at each other. "That was weird," Sarah said. "I feel like I just saw a ghost say sorry," Mike added. "She waved," Mrs. Gomez whispered, as if afraid saying it too loud might break the spell. Karen waved. And just like that, things began to shift. Over the next few days, Karen remained quiet. She didn't re-emerge with her former fervor. No walkie-talkie check-ins, no early morning shouting about misplaced trash bins. She began walking her dog, no one even knew she had one, at dusk, always with her head down, always avoiding the long alley route. She started parking her SUV in the garage instead of leaving it on display. She was there, but quieter, smaller. 1. Afternoon, Mrs. Gomez found a small basket on her doorstep with a card that read, "Apologies for the stress. Trying to be better. Karen." Inside were fresh cookies, surprisingly good ones. A week later, Karen showed up at the local community. Cleanup day. She didn't lead it. She didn't organize it. She just showed up, wore gloves, picked up litter, didn't say much. People didn't know what to do with this version of Karen at first. Some kept their distance. Some whispered. But slowly, a kind of cautious acceptance settled in. The transformation wasn't instant. No one suddenly became her best friend. But the atmosphere shifted. The alley no longer felt like a battleground. There were still challenges, still neighborly squabbles. About noise and yard clippings and whether someone's music was too loud on a Friday night. But they were handled differently now, without fear of being publicly shamed or added to a clipboard dossier. Eli, in a fit of post-Karen liberation, launched a small YouTube channel showcasing drone tricks and alley antics. One of the first videos featured the now infamous drone versus Karen moment, complete with a dramatic soundtrack and slow-motion zooms. It went viral in a quiet way. Nothing headline-making, just enough attention that the alley became a minor internet legend. "Alleyway Karen Learns a Lesson from a Drone" was the unofficial title the internet gave it. But back in Maplewood Heights, she was just Karen now. Not Alleyway Karen, not clipboard Karen. Just a woman trying, awkwardly, slowly, to patch the holes she'd poked in her community's trust. And the alley. It thrived. Kids played hopscotch. Neighbors shared plants. The garbage truck passed without incident. People parked like human beings again. Laughter replaced lectures. For the first time in years, the alley was just an alley, and everyone liked it that way. Even Karen.